What's happening in Venezuela? We see tankers being detained. Furthermore, the Pentagon is now stating that the United States intends to continue detaining shadow fleet ships transporting oil to Venezuela. Well, look, what's happening now is, well, the beginning of a new redistribution. I would say that we found ourselves in a very turbulent period of history. A restructuring of the world is beginning, a reconfiguration of the world, including a redistribution of resources. Who controls which resources? Notice that since last year, resource-related issues have been constantly discussed. There's a deal with Ukraine, then some Russian rare earth elements, then some rare earth elements in Greenland, then something else. So, suddenly it started sounding strange. Everyone started saying, we've entered the post-industrial era. Industry, resources matter. Now everything is exclusively services, information products, artificial intelligence. And suddenly, somehow, all this has been pushed aside. People are discussing who controls whom. People from the Silicon Valley are buying up land. Or rather, some strange world structure, but apparently, the world has simply reached some kind of turning point. And we are destined to live in this turning point. What it will be and what it will lead to, we don't fully know. But one of the themes that is emerging is an attempt to crudely establish control over a large share of resources in order to dictate the economic situation in the world. That is beneficial to you. It seems that this is exactly the situation that is happening. And in this sense, Russia has exposed itself. It seemed to find itself in a weak position during this redistribution of a major participant in the energy market, and no one could have moved it from this position. But it exposed itself, and, of course, competitors have happily begun to bite off its market share since it's in a weak position that it's become what's called a toxic country. And a toxic country can't defend itself well. Consequently, Russia isn't defending itself. And so the redistribution of the global oil market has begun. As I understand it, the idea is that the Americans want to completely push Russia out of the global oil market and take its share for themselves. That they're covering this up, citing concerns about Ukraine and talking about these sanctions. Notice again, they've pulled the Lindsey Graham Act out of the archives again. Yes, we haven't heard anything about it for months. It seemed to have disappeared into oblivion. Suddenly, they've urgently brought it up again, started waving it around, threatening to introduce it.so. Well, apparently India isn't giving in completely, isn't really giving up on Russian oil. And, accordingly, they need to somehow really scare it. So it stops buying Indian oil and starts buying something else, perhaps. American, yes. Well, to have something to sell in this new, redivided world, you need to control the reserves. That's why we're seeing very strange things when the US starts to clash with Canada. If anyone had told you 10 years ago that the US would clash with Canada, you'd be surprised. They'd say, "Come on, guys, what's wrong with you?" They have a mutually friendly trade agreement with North America, an American Trade Association. Everything's fine, everything's great. This can't be happening. Now we're seeing a very serious escalation. Because Canada is, after all, a very rich oil region. Of course, if you get your hands on it, and you also get your hands on Iran, you'll get a truly powerful concentration of oil resources, and you can dictate your will however the Americans want. It seems to me that we've now fallen into that trap. And the Americans have basically decided that since Russia isn't cooperating, there's no point in sparing it. And so begins, well, the pressure on the opponent. The opponent was given the opportunity to meet Trump halfway, to negotiate some solutions that Trump could present as a solution to the great problem of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Russia refuses to make concessions, thereby, as they say, well, discrediting, let's say, Trump. And Trump doesn't like such things. It hurts his pride. Well, if the opponent isn't resisting, isn't providing the solution you'd like to get, you have to force them into a situation where they'll be forced to suffer. So they're trying to make Russia suffer even more by knocking it down, and the price level that was announced is no accident. It's not at all a fact that it will be $50 per barrel. If you remember, Trump announced it, but it plays a psychological role. He's intimidating Russia, because at that price level, well, oil production in Russia, and it will simply become unprofitable. So accordingly, it's showing them what awaits them if they don't accommodate the US and find some solutions that Trump can present as a great victory. So I think there's a real struggle going on for a remade global market. including ousting Russia from it, no matter how terrifying this may seem to Russians. And considering Venezuela, is it really possible to talk about a door? Actually, how did Russia lose, right? Look, Venezuelan oil is a complicated story. There are a lot of detailed publications going on right now. It's not all that simple, but there's a theme there that's very important. The fact that Venezuelan oil is, well, familiar to the US. That is, they don't need to adapt to this oil. They have quite a few refineries that use it. And it turns out that they extract quite a bit of cheap diesel fuel from this oil, and this allows them to reduce costs in the US somewhat. So for America, it's quite a good oil territory. It won't happen quickly, but the important thing is that if movement begins there, the global oil market will receive a signal that increased production and supply are ahead for a long time. And this is already, in general, a sensitive issue for the oil market. A situation of surplus is already emerging. That is, when more oil is being supplied than the market wants and can absorb, and this always puts downward pressure on prices. And now this Venezuelan factor is emerging. Well, another one. Of course, I don't know if it will happen. Look, I don't know how things will end in Venezuela. Yeah, we don't yet know whether Venezuela will truly be brought under control or whether some kind of war against the Americans will break out there, like in Afghanistan. We don't know that yet. It's not entirely clear. But assuming they do deliver, Venezuela's production will gradually begin to increase. I don't know at what rate. But still, Venezuelan oil will go to the US for refining. And American VTI crude will be exported to another country. Of course, it would be good if by that time India had bowed its head and started buying American VTI instead of Russian. So, that's the picture. Venezuela is becoming a long-term downward pressure on prices. Not very fast, not very cheap, but a downward price factor.